They say weddings bring people together, but mine began with 2 empty chairs. I remember looking over the seating chart, my pen hovering above the paper. I had double-checked every table, every name, even the font size on the place cards. My florist, Leanne, had called it Type A romantic. I laughed politely, but it wasn't just about perfection. It was about making sure everyone had their place. Until I stared at that corner table. The one with the label I'd been reluctant to print, Parents of the Bride. It stayed blank. 3 days before the wedding, while Lucian was at the bakery finalizing the cake, I got an email titled, Trip Details, Maui Luxury Suite. I clicked it. My parents' names were right there, listed on a reservation that overlapped perfectly with our wedding weekend. First-class flights, oceanfront suite, 2 massage appointments. I stared at the screen, then read it again, and again. My hand tightened around the phone as I hit call. Mom answered on the 3rd ring. "Sweetheart," she said, chipper like it was a Sunday brunch chat. "I was just about to pack my swimsuits." "For what?" I asked, even though I already knew. "Well, the Maui trip, of course," she said. "It's been on our calendar for months." "Mom, you know my wedding is this weekend." A pause, just long enough to wound. "I thought you'd understand," she said. "When you're our age, you'll prioritize rest too. We already gave you a beautiful childhood. We've shown up for years. Don't make this about guilt." I was silent. She added, "Besides, weddings are stressful. This way, we won't be in the way." I don't know what hurt more, that she said it or that she said it so calmly. I thanked her for calling and hung up, staring at the RSVP list like it might change itself. That evening, I found myself replaying memories, not grand ones, just tiny bruises hidden in polite neglect. Like when they missed my piano recital in 10th grade for a last-minute wine tasting, when my dad called me a handful in front of my college friends, or when my mom changed the subject every time I brought up Lucian. "Family is supposed to show up," I muttered aloud, scrolling through an old photo on my fridge of me as a child blowing out birthday candles alone. That's the bare minimum. Lucian came home with a grin, holding a sample slice of lemon lavender cake. I smiled back and didn't mention the email. He set the slice down, kissed my forehead, and started boiling water for tea. I watched him move around the kitchen, steady and warm. There was no room for doubt in his actions. The night before the rehearsal, I got a FaceTime call from Mom. My stomach fluttered, not with excitement. "Astraea, don't forget to water the ficus while we're gone," she said, from a lounge chair next to a tiki torch. "Mom, the rehearsal is tomorrow." "I know." "That's why I'm calling now," she said, sipping something orange. "Don't let that plant droop like your Aunt Denise's second marriage. That thing died before the honeymoon even ended." She laughed. I didn't. I nodded, said, "I'll handle it," and hung up before she could say more. The screen read, "Call ended." It felt like a tombstone. I sat there for a while, the room dark around me, the only sound coming from the ceiling fan clicking. I didn't tell Lucian. He was upstairs drafting his vows. I didn't want to ruin his night, or mine. Maybe they were just bad at showing love. That's what I told myself. That's what I had always told myself. Like a mantra designed to keep the peace. Americans don't abandon weddings. Not even for war, I whispered to no one. But mine, for a beachside mimosa. The fridge hummed behind me. On it, the wedding invitation we'd designed months ago, gold script, ivory background, minimalist elegance. Pinned just beside it was a blank RSVP envelope from my parents, never returned. On the table, 2 place cards waited. Lucian's parents. Lucian's sister. And beneath that empty slot on the right side of the head table, 2 seats labeled only in my mind. I turned out the kitchen light, trudging upstairs to wash off the day. As I pulled down the covers, I nearly tripped over something near the door. A box, wrapped in metallic gold paper with a ribbon tied too tightly. There was no note, no tag, just the box, sitting like it had been placed there on purpose. I didn't open it, not yet. Something about the way it just sat there told me this wasn't a gift. It was a message. I opened the box with the kind of dread you feel before reading a letter you know will end a relationship. It wasn't just the look of it. Tight gold paper, strangled by a red ribbon. It was the stillness of it, like it had been placed there with intent, not celebration. The lid came off with more resistance than I expected, and what waited inside took the air out of the room. My wedding dress, or what was left of it. The bodice was scorched, the once soft lace melted in patches, fused into stiff ridges. Parts of it looked like they'd been singed with a curling iron. The delicate hem was charred black. My hands hovered over the fabric, unsure if touching it would make the damage worse or if it would make me fall apart. There was a faint smell, not of fire exactly, but of something that had been ended. On top of the dress, a folded card. 7 words, scribbled in my mother's unmistakable hand. Some people just aren't meant to wear white. I didn't speak, couldn't. My throat locked. I sat on the edge of the bed, dress laid across my lap like the corpse of something I'd once believed in. We picked that dress together. She'd zipped me into it. She called me beautiful, said I reminded her of Grace Kelly. And now this. What changed? No, that wasn't the right question. This wasn't sudden. This was chosen. Underneath the ruined fabric, I found something else, a nightgown, faded blush silk, yellowed lace trim. I hadn't seen it in years, but I knew it instantly. It was the one Mom wore for weeks after the divorce, back when she'd chain smoke on the porch and tell anyone who'd listen how my dad had failed her. Why send it to me now? This isn't a gift, I said aloud. It's a warning. A ghost, wearing perfume. I didn't cry. Instead, I started mentally cataloging. The box arrived overnight, likely dropped by a courier, not the postal service. The burn patterns looked intentional but controlled. The card was unsigned, but personal. The gown, symbolic. Everything about it screamed manipulation disguised as memory. Passive aggression is still aggression, I muttered, especially when wrapped in ribbon. I wrapped the gown back up. Not the dress, it was beyond saving. But the nightgown, I folded carefully, like I might study it later, looking for fingerprints. Then I shoved the whole thing under my bed. I couldn't bear to throw it out, but I sure as hell wasn't leaving it in plain view. I poured myself coffee, black, bitter, grounding. My hands weren't shaking anymore, just still, frozen by clarity. Was this her way of saying I wasn't worthy? I was 34, no kids, not the golden daughter with the MBA and the country club husband. I'd worked in non-profits, moved 3 times, and taken time to find Lucian. We met at a city council meeting about water policy, hardly a fairy tale. But he knew how to look at me without needing to reshape me. That was real. And still, some part of me wondered if she saw me as tarnished. In America, if you haven't married by 35, people start whispering. It's not always cruel. Sometimes it's pity dressed as politeness. Still waiting on Mr. Right? So focused on your career, I admire that. It's never too late. Even your own mother starts speaking in that tone. I sat in the silence and began a list in my head. All the things I will never pass down. Silence when something feels off. Smiles that mean surrender. Wedding gifts that double as threats. By the time Lucian returned home, the kitchen smelled like roasted garlic and rosemary. He was trying a new chicken recipe, something from his sister's cookbook. I didn't tell him about the box. Not yet. I couldn't ruin this sliver of peace. Not tonight. Smells amazing, I said, kissing him on the cheek. You okay? He asked, eyes narrowing a little. Just tired, I said. It wasn't a lie. Just not the full version. We set the table, poured wine, and played music low in the background. For a moment, it felt normal, whole, like maybe the storm wouldn't reach us. Until my phone buzzed. It was a notification from Instagram. Sable was live. Curiosity overrode reason. I clicked. There she was, my younger sister, in a flowing white dress, standing on a balcony somewhere expensive, champagne in one hand, glowing light behind her. She looked straight into the camera and said, "Some families build weddings, others build stories. Which are you?" I didn't flinch. I didn't throw the phone. But inside, I cracked. Just a little. Because just like that, it wasn't just the dress they burned. The box was still beneath my bed. I hadn't touched it since I shoved it there, but the scent of scorched lace and the faint perfume from that cursed nightgown clung to me like a shadow. I hadn't slept well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mom's handwriting. 7 words, and somehow she said more in that note than she had during most of my adult life. I sat in the kitchen, cradling a mug of lukewarm coffee I couldn't remember brewing. The sky outside was smeared gray. Rain tapped the windows lightly, as if even the weather was being polite. Sable's live stream played in my head like a broken record. Some families build weddings, others build stories. Which are you? I clicked into the saved video. She stood on a balcony, white flowing fabric that mimicked a bridal silhouette just enough to make it pointed. She never said my name, but the subtext was clear. Her smile was gentle, her tone syrupy. "Not every bride is blessed with support," she said, adjusting her hair with calculated grace. "But some were never meant to be supported." The comments poured in. Hearts, tear emojis, words like queen, elegance, inspiring. I was the ghost in her narrative, the emotionally unstable sister. The one too sensitive, too late, too much. She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. The familiar sting settled in. Not pain, exactly. Something more tired, like peeling off a bandage and finding the wound had scarred in silence. Later that morning, while Lucian was out meeting the officiant, my phone pinged again. It was an email from Mom. Subject line, "A better way to celebrate." I knew what it was before I opened it. She'd done this kind of thing before, sending links instead of apologies, articles instead of answers. It was a lifestyle piece about the new trend of intimate weddings. Less stress, more elegance. Under the forwarded headline, her only comment, "Just something I thought might inspire calm." No reference to the dress, or the nightgown, or the box that held both like a coffin. Just calm. They always preferred aesthetic over accountability. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking below her message. I typed, "You don't get to redefine cruelty as sophistication." Then I deleted it, closed the tab. They were masters at rewriting narratives, like the time they said I stormed out of Dad's retirement dinner when I had simply left early after being seated at the back table, behind the catering crew. I remembered slipping out quietly, unnoticed. They remembered drama. "It's not gaslighting when it's elegant," I whispered. "It's just rewriting." Lucian came home mid-afternoon, bringing the smell of rain and lavender with him. He dropped his umbrella by the door and kissed the top of my head. "Something's off," he said after a minute. "Want to talk?" I hesitated. "Do you want to confront them?" he asked, his tone even, knowing. I shook my head. "No, I want to expose them, but on my terms." He didn't press. He never did. He just nodded and said, "Let me know when you're ready." I spent the rest of the afternoon gathering things, screenshots of Sable's video, the email from Mom, an older message from Dad, stiff and clipped, about the rehearsal time being inconvenient. I made a folder on my laptop called Unsaid Things. Not for revenge, not yet, but for clarity, because silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's surveillance. The next morning, I dressed and walked to a small cafe downtown, one I used to meet Mom at for wedding planning months ago, back when she still pretended to care. The barista smiled at me like she remembered. I ordered Mom's usual, oat milk cappuccino with cinnamon dusted on top. Then I sat at our old table, facing the window, pretending to read a book I hadn't opened in weeks. I wasn't waiting for anyone. I just needed to reclaim the space. Turn the ghosts into guests. Turn the noise into something quieter. I sipped the drink slowly, letting the warmth sink in. Letting myself feel what I hadn't allowed in days. The betrayal wasn't new. It had just changed costume. "I'm not invisible," I said to myself. "I've just been edited." Just as I finished the last sip, my phone buzzed. A notification from the planner. New version of the RSVP list, now final. I opened it, scrolling past familiar names, Lucian's parents, a few mutual friends, a cousin I barely knew. And then I saw it. Event host representative, Callista Arroyo. I blinked. Callista, of course. They let her write the script. The screen blurred for a second, not because it glitched, because I blinked too fast, too hard. The line stared back at me, clean, centered, bold. Event host, Callista Arroyo, sister of the bride. It wasn't a typo. It was a promotion I didn't know she applied for. I read it again. The digital RSVP list I'd reviewed 20 times had never included a line like that. Until now. Something felt off, so I clicked into the file's version history. That's when I saw it. 1 week ago, Callista had edited the document. She changed the venue address from our confirmed garden hall to the address of an outdated venue, the one we'd toured and rejected months ago. The one that didn't have wheelchair access, where Lucian's father would have been stuck in the parking lot. Lucian walked in from the hallway, phone in hand. "Everything okay?" he asked. I turned the screen toward him. He squinted. "Wait, that's the wrong venue. This is the old address." "The wrong capacity, wrong everything." I nodded. "Callista changed it, on purpose." He stepped closer. "So, they won't even show up to the right place?" My voice barely registered. "They were never planning to." Silence swelled between us. Outside, traffic buzzed faintly through the window, but inside, it felt like I'd been dropped into a different room, one where the walls had ears, but none listened to me. The next notification buzzed a few minutes later. It was from Aunt Liza's public Facebook page, a photo, no, an album, from Hawaii. My mother, Ophalie, wore an oversized sun hat and drank from a coconut. My father sat beside her in linen, smiling too broadly. Behind them, Callista posed in a cream dress, standing between two cousins who hadn't RSVP'd either. The album title? Sometimes peace is found away from the noise. Noise. I was the noise. I saved the photos without hesitation, one by one, not for revenge, not for show, but for the record. Then I returned to the RSVP log and exported the metadata, highlighting the timestamps from Callista's edits. Lucian sat across from me, watching. "What's the plan?" I clicked open a new folder. They rewrote the story. I'm writing a footnote they'll never erase. That night, I redesigned my seating chart. I deleted the Parents of the Bride label. That row would be empty now. On my side, only Lucian and my old piano teacher, Mrs. Worthing, remained. She'd emailed 2 weeks ago with tears in her sentences and love in every line. "When the guest list shrinks," I murmured, "the truth grows louder." I ordered new place cards, minimalist, simple font, no titles, just names. The next morning, I printed out 3 photos from the Hawaii album. I slipped them into the back pocket of my wedding planning binder. They were proof of intent, of replacement, of how easy it was for family to substitute presents with palm trees. Lucian and I didn't speak much that morning. He brewed coffee, checked emails, answered a few calls from the caterer. I reviewed vendor receipts, making sure nothing else had been tampered with. By early afternoon, we sat on the patio. Spring clouds hung low but held back the rain. I opened my notes app and started typing. Not a speech, not a confrontation, a list. Things they erased. My name from the RSVP. My ownership over my own wedding. My trust in being seen, heard, considered. I didn't add the dress. That had its own place in the archive of cruelty. Around 5:00 p.m., my phone buzzed again. A voice note from Callista. I pressed play. "Hey, just checking if the vows will be live-streamed. Would be nice for Mom and Dad to hear something meaningful while they're relaxing. Let me know. I'd hate for them to miss the only part that might actually matter." The smile in her voice was audible. A performance, a script. I hit record and replied. "I'll make sure they hear everything, even the parts they tried to mute." Callista's voice note echoed through my earbuds as I sat in front of my laptop. Again, I had already listened to it 3 times that evening, but something about the last 5 words, "it might actually matter," gnawed at me. Her tone wasn't curious, it was calculated, and she knew it would reach me. I opened the RSVP file again. Not to verify guest counts, but to study the pattern, the edits, the signature trails. One name kept appearing in the change logs, hers. I minimized the window and opened the wedding folder on my desktop. Dozens of subfolders stared back. Florals, ceremony layout, vendor contacts. then one at the bottom I hadn't named. From Mom. Inside were the original specs for my wedding dress, the one we'd chosen together a year ago, before she decided I was no longer the bride she'd imagined. A note attached from the bridal boutique marked "Alteration requested by parent." I reread it slowly. Requested changes include neckline raise, skirt removal, and replacement of fabric with traditional satin overlay for modesty. Modesty? I grabbed my keys and drove across town to see Lottie, the seamstress. She'd worked on my rehearsal dress, the one I'd now wear as my actual gown. Her small shop sat beneath a vintage bookstore, cluttered but welcoming. Lottie looked up from her sewing machine, adjusted her glasses. "You here for the pickup?" I nodded. "And I wanted to ask about the first dress, the one that was altered." She hesitated. "Oh, that. I didn't want to say anything, but your mom insisted the changes were from you, said you wanted something more, timeless, less modern." My stomach turned. "She edited my silhouette," I said, "just like she edits my story." I took the new dress, thanked Lottie, and got back in the car. Before turning the key, I pulled up my email. There it was. A family fund notification. Joint account update. $5,000 transferred to Callista. Reason: wedding coordination, Callista Arroyo. I let out a short, bitter laugh. They erased me from the ledger before I even walked the aisle. Back at Lucian's apartment, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I laid the new dress across our bed, then walked into the living room, where Lucian and the wedding planner were discussing rain backups for the ceremony. "Quick update," I said calmly. "There will be no mention of my parents in the ceremony program." Both looked at me, surprised, but silent. Lucian nodded first. The planner hesitated, then opened her laptop and began typing. "They gave up their seats," I said. "I'm not saving them anymore." Later that night, I was organizing childhood keepsakes when I found an old piano recital program. Age 10. I flipped it open to my name, or what should have been my name. Anastasia, misspelled, uncorrected, forgotten. It hit me. This wasn't new. They'd always gotten me slightly wrong. Enough to call it a mistake, never enough to fix it. "They never spelled me right," I whispered, "so I'll start spelling myself out." I opened a blank document and began typing my vows, not the ones pre-written by templates or traditions, but words that belonged only to me. Every syllable a reclamation. When I finished, I printed 2 copies and slipped them into a fireproof folder Lucian had tucked away for important documents. This wasn't for sentimentality, it was strategy. I drafted an email to my mother. It said everything I would have shouted 10 years ago, but I didn't send it. I closed the tab. I'm not being dramatic, I'm being deliberate. The apartment was quiet. Lucian was already asleep. I sat by the window, the city lights blinking in the distance, reflecting off my glass of water like tiny flickering truths. Then came the final hit, a text from an unknown number. "You've made a mistake. Don't forget who raised you." I stared at it. My thumb hovered over the screen, but I didn't respond. Instead, I set the phone down, leaned back in the chair, and closed my eyes. "I didn't forget," I whispered to the dark. "That's exactly why I'm done." The message sat in my phone like a drop of acid on skin. "Don't forget who raised you." I didn't need to reread it. My thumb hovered for half a second before I hit delete. No screenshot, no reply, no space given to people who confuse raising with possession. They tried to remind me who made me. I was about to remind them who I became. The morning light through the apartment window felt untrustworthy, too bright for the kind of day I was walking into. Lucian brewed coffee. He asked if I wanted eggs. I declined. My stomach hadn't asked for anything in days. I scrolled mindlessly, trying to distract myself with articles I wouldn't remember. That's when I got the message from Fiona, a college friend who'd stayed in touch just enough to be relevant. Is this real?" she wrote, attaching a photo. I opened it. There, clear as daylight, was Elias, my ex-fiancé. Sitting at a beachside restaurant in Maui, across from Ophalie and Remington. All 3 of them were smiling like nothing had ever gone wrong, like time had never passed, like I'd never even existed. The caption beneath the image, posted on a cousin's account, read, "Nothing like real family." My pulse didn't spike. I didn't throw the phone. I just stared. Elias once said, "I just want to feel accepted." And I guess he finally got it. Just not from me. "They replaced me with the man I was supposed to marry," I said aloud. How poetic. By mid-morning, the videographer emailed over the wedding video preview. A favor from my mother, one of the few tasks she hadn't fully abandoned. Or so I thought. I clicked the link and waited for it to buffer. The opening montage played soft music over childhood photos, except none of them were of me. Not one. A blonde toddler I didn't recognize. A girl in a tutu playing violin. Not me. Not even close. The voiceover cut in. "We're so proud of our child." Watching them grow into someone so centered, so elegant. No name, no face I knew, no trace of Astraea. "I wasn't forgotten," I whispered, almost laughing. I was erased. Lucian came into the room just as I shut the laptop. He didn't ask. I opened my email, typed a message to the videographer. "Hi, I'll need a complete re-edit. Remove all supplied material. Use only our own footage and images. Replace voiceovers with ambient audio or music. I'll pay whatever's needed. Just cut them out." He replied within minutes. "Understood. I'll send a new draft tomorrow." Because if they controlled the footage, they controlled the feelings. Not this time. That afternoon, I drafted a social media post. I didn't schedule it, didn't upload it, just wrote it. Sometimes the silence you carry is louder than the applause they fake. Then I uploaded the photos I'd curated for weeks. Candids with Lucian, my piano teacher hugging me, friends laughing over champagne. The people who showed up not just signed cards. I didn't tag anyone. I just saved it as a draft and closed my phone. Standing in front of the mirror with my rehearsal outfit on, I paused. The blouse I chose was soft ivory, not white. A nod to tradition without yielding to it. My reflection didn't look radiant, but it looked clear. "I've always dressed for their approval," I told the woman in the mirror. "This time, I'm dressing for closure. They say, speak now or forever hold your peace. I'm holding peace, but speaking anyway." The rehearsal dinner was hosted at a small venue Lucian's mentor had offered last minute. It was simple. Soft lighting, good food, no speeches. Guests trickled in. I made eye contact. I smiled when it felt real. Then I saw it. An envelope slid under my seat. No name on the outside. I opened it. Inside was a single page, yellowed slightly, the ink familiar. A list of family rules. Typed. Annotated in red pen. Rule number 1. Respect hierarchy. Rule number 3. Don't contradict your elders. Rule number 6. Don't bring shame. That last one was circled 3 times. I let the paper rest in my lap, took a long sip of water, breathed in. "Too late," I said quietly. I brought truth instead. The list in my lap felt heavier than paper should. Family rules, typed in neat margins, red-penned corrections, phrases circled with the kind of insistence only Ophelie could weaponize. I flipped to the back. My name wasn't there, not even in the margins. I folded it. Once, then again, slipped it into my clutch like an artifact, not to preserve it, but to prove it existed. If these were the rules, I was never in the game, but tonight I was rewriting the board. Lucian's business associate had rented a small event space tucked behind a florist shop downtown. It smelled faintly of eucalyptus and catered shrimp. People arrived in clean lines, business casual, glasses clinking, polite greetings exchanged like rehearsed lines. I moved through the space, not avoiding anyone, but not inviting anything either. 10 minutes in, Sophie, Lucian's colleague, grabbed my wrist gently. "Hey," she whispered, "you probably want to see this." She pulled out her phone and opened an email, one she'd been CC'd on by mistake. It had originally gone from my cousin to Callista, but someone had replied all. It read, "Let's keep the spotlight on Callista. She's the one holding things together. Astraea prefers the background anyway." I felt the air change. It wasn't surprise. I was long past that. It was more like confirmation, cold and clean. "They didn't just erase me," I said, looking at Sophie. They replaced me and made sure I stayed invisible. She touched my shoulder. I'm sorry. That's cruel. It's familiar, I replied, then thanked her and stepped away. By the time I'd reached the refreshment table, my phone buzzed. Group text. A cousin from Dad's side, meant for someone else. Hopefully she doesn't cry on stage again like last time. God, I can't do drama tonight. They were rehearsing my breakdown before I even stepped onto the floor. I didn't cry. I didn't leave. I smiled. Not the kind that hides sadness, the kind that says, I saw you, and I'm still standing. I made my way around the room, greeting people who wouldn't meet my eyes, who offered compliments about how elegant the decor was. I kept tally in my head, who had stayed neutral, who had jumped ship, who was hedging their bets. It wasn't paranoia, it was inventory. Let them think I'm here for peace. I'm here to deliver clarity. Just before the toast began, someone showed me Callista's latest Instagram story. She'd posted it less than an hour before arriving. A picture of herself in a champagne dress captioned, "You can't force harmony. Blood isn't love." Front and center. Filters just soft enough to look vulnerable. The girl who scripted the drama now pretends to be its victim, I muttered, scrolling past. It would have been easier to let her narrative win. Easier to stay quiet, swallow the pride. But I hadn't gotten this far to play the role they wrote for me. Lucian's mentor raised his glass for a toast, then, unexpectedly, handed the mic to me. I didn't hesitate. I walked forward, steady, calm. Not everyone at your table is in your corner, I began. But sometimes, the corner is where you get the best view of what's real. A few murmurs passed through the crowd. I won't name names. I won't call out the people who didn't show up, or the ones who tried to turn my story into theirs, because that would be giving them more airtime than they deserve. I looked around. But I will thank those who stayed, who didn't need a title to show loyalty, who didn't require performance to offer presence. Lucian met my eyes across the room. I'm grateful for the family I built, not the one that took credit for building me. I ended the toast there. No flourish, no mom and dad, just the truth. The applause was quiet. Some didn't clap. That was fine. As I made my way back to my seat, my phone buzzed, a text from Callista. I hope that little speech was worth what's coming. I smiled, typed back. It was, especially if what's coming is the truth. The dress fit. That was the first miracle of the day. I stared at myself in the mirror, hands smoothing the fabric over my hips, not to check the lines, but to anchor myself in something real. The reflection looking back wasn't trembling. She wasn't waiting for approval or rehearsing what might go wrong. She was done with all that. The dress didn't carry a curse. The people who judged me did. I stepped out of the dressing room at the venue's bridal suite just as Lucian came around the corner with a small envelope in hand. His expression had changed. Quiet, unreadable, the way someone looks when they've been handed something they can't return. A courier just dropped this off. It's for you. He didn't need to say from who. The handwriting was Ophelie's. Inside was a single page, a revised copy of the family trust, freshly notarized, dated one day after I had emailed my engagement announcement. My name had been removed. A sticky note in her usual slanted cursive was attached. We believe in rewarding alignment. I let the page rest in my lap for a moment. They didn't just cross out my name, I whispered. They monetized their disapproval. Lucian kneeled beside me. Do you want to stop all this? We can go somewhere, anywhere. I looked at him and shook my head. This isn't about starting over. This is about finishing what they tried to write over me. By the time guests began arriving, the clouds had parted and the garden lawn looked cinematic. Lanterns swayed slightly in the breeze. There were no grand floral arches, no velvet runners, just intention. That's when Callista arrived. In white, a full-length gown with a fitted bodice and a satin train that mimicked every Pinterest post I'd deleted months ago. One of Lucian's co-workers mistook her for the bride and complimented her glow. She didn't correct them. And in front of 3 guests, 2 mutual friends and my childhood neighbor, Callista laughed and said, Astraea's got maid of honor energy today. Look at her, So elegant, so supportive. I smiled, not out of politeness, out of data collection. When you steal attention, you reveal your emptiness. I didn't speak to her, didn't need to. Instead, I pulled Lucian aside just before the ceremony began and handed him the trust document. His eyes scanned the text. He didn't ask any questions, just folded the paper neatly, kissed my cheek, and said, "Let's go make our own." We walked to the altar. The officiant nodded. Guests hushed. The sun dipped behind a cloud long enough to cool the air. Instead of reciting the vows we'd practiced, I pulled a folded page from my bouquet. "I've written something different," I said, voice steady. I was raised to believe that silence was noble, that not making waves meant strength. But all silence did was protect the wrong people. I glanced up briefly. A few heads shifted in their chairs. Sometimes, the people who raise you only raise your silence. Today, I bury that silence. Lucian took my hand. We didn't read love poems. We didn't light candles. We said thank you to the people who came. We promised truth and accountability over convenience. It was short. It was ours. When we stepped away from the altar, I glanced over to the reception area. The seating chart was different now. There were no parents of the bride or family section, just names. 2 chairs at the very back of the garden remained unmarked, intentionally so. As the reception began, a woman I barely knew leaned in and asked someone nearby, "Why no family here?" The reply came without hesitation. "You don't need roots to grow, just space." We ate, we danced, we laughed. And then, just as the planner handed me a copy of the final guest list for my keepsake folder, she added, "Oh, we found this slipped under a napkin at the head table. It had your name on it." It was a card, thick paper, familiar handwriting. "This isn't over." Signed, Callista. I smiled, not amused, not bitter. She wasn't coming for the wedding, I said quietly. She was coming for the story. I stared at the card from Callista a little longer than I should have. "This isn't over," it read, in her cursive, rehearsed, and smug, the kind of handwriting that pretends to be casual but belongs in a courtroom. I placed it next to a photo of Lucian and me at the altar. Our faces, clear and grounded. Hers, nowhere near. If she wanted a second act, I was ready with the receipts. The morning after the ceremony, we hosted a small brunch at Lucian's house. Just a few close friends, some of his family, and our officiant. Light food, strong coffee, and no speeches. That peace was shattered by the sound of my phone pinging. It was a message from my mother. "You replaced us too easily," she wrote. "After all we gave you." I stared at the message for several seconds, letting the words settle in like ash. Not congratulations, not "you looked beautiful," not even a "we saw the photos," just accusation, veiled in the tone of a wounded benefactor. I didn't respond with words. I sent a photo, the one from the reception, the head table, the 2 empty seats labeled "reserved," never filled. They left before I had the chance. I just didn't run after them this time. As I set the phone down, our wedding planner, Mariah, tapped my shoulder. She hesitated. "There's something I probably should have told you earlier," she said, "but I didn't want to add anything before the ceremony." I nodded, motioned for her to continue. "Your mom, she requested we pull all childhood photos of you from the slideshow, said it didn't match the aesthetic." I blinked once. "She said it would distract from the elegance," Mariah added, more softly now. It didn't surprise me, but it still left a bruise. "They didn't hate who I was," I said under my breath. "They just hated that it wasn't them." Later that day, Lucian posted a wedding photo, one of us holding hands, laughing. The caption was short, "Chosen family. Chosen peace." Within an hour, it had been shared over 2,000 times. Strangers commented things like, "This gave me chills," and "You're stronger than most." And then came the private messages, from women I'd never met, from daughters and sisters and even mothers. "I didn't tell them the whole story," I whispered, rereading a comment with 300 likes. "I just showed them who I became." That night, an unexpected message came through. It was from Aunt Caroline, my mother's estranged younger sister. I saw what they did to your mother's sister years ago, she wrote. I should have spoken then. I didn't respond immediately. I saved the message in a folder labeled Not Gone Unnoticed. Even late truth has value, if only to confirm we weren't crazy. As sunset stretched across the neighborhood, I walked through the streets where I learned to ride a bike, past the grocery store that used to let me sneak peppermints, past the church my mother insisted we attend for appearances. In my hand was the wedding box, gold and once glamorous, now scuffed at the edges. I didn't cry, didn't pause for drama, just walked it into the public library, slipped it into the donation bin near the community board. The past doesn't need burning, it just doesn't belong in my house anymore. When I returned home, Lucian was in the kitchen. No music playing, just the sound of the faucet running and the quiet hum of him being present. He held an envelope in his hand. My name was written in block letters across the front. It came an hour ago, he said. I opened it carefully. Inside was a printed email. Estate dispute notification from the Arroyo Family Trust. Of course. I smiled slightly, not because I was surprised, but because it finally made sense. They brought lawyers. I brought the truth. It wasn't grief they delivered this time. It was paperwork. The envelope sat on my desk, thick with the weight of what they believed they could still control. I opened it slowly, careful not to tear it, out of principle, not sentiment. There was no card, no note of congratulations, just a formal letterhead from a law firm and a case number typed in precise font. Estate dispute notification, Arroyo Family Trust. Lucian looked over from the kitchen where he was rinsing blueberries. More flowers from strangers or a lawsuit from blood? I held the letter up without a word. He nodded. Got it. I sat down, logged into my laptop, and forwarded the email to Miriam, my attorney. The subject line: Let's start with this. An hour later, I was in her office. She poured me water with lemon. No small talk, just facts. We've gone through their filings, she said, sliding a folder across the table. Turns out, you were listed as co-owner of the West Pearl property 5 years ago. We found the original deed, your signature's on it, but in the updated documents, filed 3 months ago, you're no longer there. Let me guess, I said. Callista's is. Front and center, Miriam confirmed. It appears the transfer was done without your authorization. The signatures don't match. We have a strong case. I let out a long breath. They called me dramatic. I call this criminal. She raised her eyebrows but didn't argue. And there's more, she added, tapping on her screen. In the discovery files, we pulled an internal communication submitted with a wedding grant request. It lists Callista Arroyo as the bride. I sat back. The edges of my mouth curled in something close to humor. They didn't want to miss my wedding, I murmured. They wanted to pretend it wasn't mine. Back at home, I signed the official challenge. Miriam watched me as I handed the document over. Want to discuss potential damages? She asked. No, I said. I'm not suing for the money. I want it on public record who tried to erase me. Lucian leaned on the doorway, arms crossed. This isn't revenge, he said. It's restoration. The next morning, I published a blog post I'd written months ago and kept in drafts. It didn't name names. It didn't scream. It was called What We Don't Post. It talked about being rewritten in your own life, about inherited silence, about the violence of beautiful lies. The post went viral. Within 48 hours, I received over 200 private messages. Women, some men, people who had lived my story, only under different last names. This happened to me too. This is my mother. I didn't think anyone else knew. I thought I was just broken. I didn't respond to them all. I couldn't. But I read every word. I thought the courtroom would clear me, I wrote in my journal later that night. But the comments section did it first. That Friday, another email arrived. This time from Remington. I didn't know about the deed, he wrote. I was never told. I read it once, twice, and forwarded it to Miriam, nothing else. When they finally speak, it's only because you stopped listening. The next call came from Miriam 2 days later. I was on the couch with Lucian, watching a documentary we weren't really following. She didn't mince words. "You should know," she said. "There's been an update. Callista retained a PR team." I didn't sigh. I didn't laugh. I just replied, "Good. I already wrote my press release." Lucian raised an eyebrow. "It's called The Truth." The soil was soft beneath my toes as I stood barefoot in the garden, watering the lavender Lucian planted the week we returned from our honeymoon. Not the honeymoon we'd planned, but the version of it that followed silence, not confetti. The kind that comes when the crowd has thinned and the truth is louder than the celebration. I watched the water trickle down the stems and disappear into the roots. Some things don't need to bloom immediately. They just need to hold. I stopped waiting for a response. The silence became the answer. That morning, Miriam called. Her voice was gentle. "You have grounds to move forward," she said. "On the estate, the property deed, the sponsorship fraud. It's all documented now." "I know," I replied. "You want to keep going?" I stared out at the row of mint growing along the back fence. "No," I said finally. "Justice doesn't always require courtrooms. Sometimes it's just walking away and letting them hear your silence louder than your words." Miriam didn't press. She understood that sometimes winning isn't about punishment, it's about peace. I emailed the firm that afternoon and formally withdrew the restitution process. I CC'd no one. I included no explanation. I was done fighting ghosts. That evening, I was sorting through an old kitchen drawer filled with takeout menus and half-used candles when I found it, a tattered recipe book that belonged to my grandmother. Inside, pressed between pages stained with flour, was a folded envelope with my name on it. The handwriting was hers. "Don't let them steal your name," the note read. "You made it mean something. You." I sat down on the kitchen floor and cried. Not from anger, not from pity, from recognition. Someone had seen me long before I saw myself. That was enough. Later that night, I logged in to check my email one last time, and there it was. A message from Ophelie. Subject: "One day, you'll understand." Body: "You've made your point. Maybe you'll understand one day what we did to protect you." Protect me? I hovered over the reply button, started typing. Then I stopped. They always explained away harm. I didn't owe them my comprehension. I closed the tab. The next morning, I went to the DMV. I stood in line behind a woman with 3 screaming children and a man cursing about license plate renewals. I waited 43 minutes. When they called my number, I walked to the desk, handed over my paperwork, and dropped the name Equals from every legal document I had. They asked if I wanted to hyphenate. "No," I said, "just mine." That afternoon, I logged into my company's portal and changed the name on my badge, my email, my signature block. Then I went home, pulled out the sheet music I'd composed my senior year of college, an unfinished piano piece that sat in a dusty folder for over a decade. I placed it on the stand, and I played. I finished it. The story they started ended with their silence. Mine begins with my own signature. As the sun began to dip behind the mountains, I scrolled through photos from the wedding, not to ache, not to scan for absence, but to observe. I didn't look for who was missing. I focused on who stayed. Loyalty doesn't require matching blood, only matching truth. Just as I was locking my office, the doorbell rang. Lucian was in the backyard. I opened the front door. A small brown box sat on the porch. No return address, no note. I brought it inside, set it on the counter, opened it slowly. Inside was a photo, a vintage black and white print. Me, maybe 4 or 5, sitting beside my grandmother at her old piano. I wore a crown made of construction paper. She held a sheet of music in her lap. On the back, in fading ink, "Your song is yours. Finish it loudly." I placed the photo in a silver frame and set it on the bookshelf across from my desk. My grandmother and I, at her piano, long before I had words for what it meant to be erased. She always saw me, before anyone did, before I did. It felt right for her to sit there, quietly present as I turned the last page of this chapter. They wanted to silence my name. Instead, I carved it into legacy. A month after the wedding, Lucian and I hosted a spring brunch at his family's estate in Connecticut. Not the kind with white linens and ice sculptures. It was easy. Quiche, mimosas, folding tables in the sun. Real people. Real smiles. My feet were bare in the grass. No makeup, no cameras. Lucian had one surprise left. I was mid-conversation with his sister when he tapped the microphone of a small Bluetooth speaker, and a slideshow began on the outdoor projector. A spread of photos filled the screen, me standing alone in my wedding dress, looking into the camera without apology. He titled it, "The Bride Alone." The last frame read, "You don't need a crowd to be crowned." Within hours, the magazine link he'd submitted quietly had gone viral. There were thousands of shares. The image of me walking down the aisle without parents at either side sparked something. I didn't expect the attention. I didn't want sympathy. But what came was different. Messages from women who had walked themselves down aisles. From daughters who cut their mothers out of the family group text. From sons who watched fathers praise the wrong sibling. Strangers wrote, "I felt seen." The ones who didn't know me still knew me. Callista tried to fight back. She launched a media post of her own. A soft-lit portrait captioned, "Healing isn't always mutual, but I still choose grace." It backfired. A wedding guest, someone I didn't even remember, sent a tip to a blogger. Footage surfaced of Callista in her white dress, waving to photographers as if it were her day. The comments were brutal. The real villain wasn't invisible, just entitled. I didn't say a word. There's a time for speeches, and a time to step aside and let the story write itself. 2 days later, Miriam, my attorney, released a joint public notice. It confirmed I had formally relinquished any financial pursuit from the estate. In return, a clause barred Ophalie, Remington, and Callista from publicly representing themselves as my family or speaking on my behalf. No future attempt to misrepresent familial connection shall be tolerated under law. Ophalie's social calendar thinned overnight. Callista's brand sponsorships quietly vanished. And I went back to my garden. At brunch that weekend, Lucian's mother stood with a glass of sparkling cider and raised a toast. To the daughter we didn't give birth to, but proudly belonged to. I didn't cry. I just stood, wearing the wedding earrings I never got to use, and looked her in the eye. That was enough. You don't need old blood to feel at home, just new truth. 2 weeks later, I flew back to my hometown, alone. I walked past the church where I was supposed to marry Elias. The building hadn't changed, but I had. I didn't stop, just nodded toward it like an old acquaintance you've forgiven but don't invite inside. At the library, I stood in front of the drop box, pulled the final printed copy of my memoir from my bag, and slid it in. Title: The Gift They Left Behind. As I walked back to my car, a woman about my age approached me hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you the one from the wedding piece? The one who walked alone?" I nodded. She swallowed. "I read your story. I'm leaving my family too. Thank you for showing me it's not wrong." I smiled. "Leaving isn't the shame," I said. "Staying silent was